Yeah, the only problem is it talks back to me. Hold on. All right. So Jean, if you'll let people in, then I'm going to go ahead and get started. All right. Welcome to our next in a series of educational forums that we're presenting as a part of the League of Women Voters of Alabama. And this episode or forum that we're doing tonight is a voter education focused educational forum. And we're so glad to have the Alabama Poor People's Campaign here with us. And I'm going to turn this over in just a minute to Dana Ellis, who is going to be our moderator tonight. But I did want to let everybody know that the League of Women Voters of Alabama has voted. Our board decided that we wanted to be a mobilizing partner to support the efforts to get people to Washington in June, and they'll talk more about that. But I wanted you to know that we are really excited to be a part of that, and looking forward to learning more about the Poor People's Campaign in Alabama and some other topics as well. And I appreciate everyone who's joined us tonight. And if you have questions, just put them in the chat, and we'll keep track of that, and we'll address them as we go. And I'm going to hand it off to Dana Ellis, who is the president of the Greater Birmingham League of Women Voters, and she's also part of the Poor People's Campaign as well. So thank you, Dana. I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Kathy. Thanks for everybody who's here tonight. As Kathy said, I'm so proud the League of Women Voters has decided to be a mobilizing partner for the June 18th rally on DC that you'll hear more about. I am honored to be on the coordinating committee of the Alabama Poor People's Campaign, and we formed in late 2017. The people on our panel tonight that you'll hear from at various times, but I want to introduce now so that you will know who they are. And as I introduce y'all, you can wave. Carolyn Foster. Reverend Foster is an ordained deacon serving at St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Birmingham. She works for Greater Birmingham Ministries, serving as the Faith Community Coordinator, and is one of the tri-chairs of the Alabama Poor People's Campaign. Wanda Bryant also lives in Birmingham. She works as a constable for Jefferson County. She is one of the tri-chairs for the Alabama Poor People's Campaign and is a very proud grandmother, especially tonight, as her grandchild helped her with her access. Reverend Connie Allgood is the pastor of the United Methodist Inner City Ministries in Mobile. So those are the three tri-chairs of the Alabama Poor People's Campaign. We learned recently, just in the last few days, that we could be joined tonight by one of the national leaders for the Poor People's Campaign. Shelley Barnes is the policy director for the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, and the Cairo Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice. The Cairo Center is one of the two anchor organizations of the Poor People's Campaign. Within the last few weeks, a very interesting, important report was released about the effects of the pandemic, and we invited Shelley, and she graciously agreed to join us to share with you for a minute about that report. Questions, as she's talking, questions that you put in about the report, we will ask when she's finished with her presentation, and then we'll go to the tri-chairs for their presentation. Shelley?
Thank you so much, Dana, and everybody who organized this call this evening. It's so good to be with you all tonight. Alabama, if you don't know, is very important to the Poor People's Campaign for so many reasons. Its generation, its history, its generations of freedom fighters, people we've learned from and lost and carry with us and continue to learn from today. And so it's inspiring and powerful to be with you this evening and to be walking with you towards June 18th and beyond. I wanted to say just a little bit about what we know after this pandemic report came out, about what's at stake, both in the country and in Alabama. So before the pandemic, we knew that there were 140 million poor and low-income people in the country, 140 million. And of that 140 million, about 2 million or 45% of the people in Alabama were included. So about 45% of the people living in Alabama, over 2 million people, were poor or one emergency away from being poor before the pandemic. And we knew that these millions of people didn't have access to healthcare, housing, clean water, really any of the prescriptions we needed to adequately care for ourselves and our loved ones through the pandemic. And I know what we witnessed, as I'm sure many of you all have, is that these gaps in our systems and our policies had devastating consequences among poor households and poor communities. And so with this Poor People's Pandemic Report, we looked at things that haven't been looked at together yet. We looked at poverty, we looked at income, we looked at COVID death rates and race across all the counties in the country, over 3,200 counties. And we found that, in fact, after the first phase of the pandemic, what has really been unfolding is a poor people's pandemic. The death rates in poor counties has been twice the death rates of the nation, of richer counties. And then at different phases of the pandemic, those death rates were even higher than this, going up to 3, 4, 5 times as much. But the CDC wasn't collecting or disseminating this information on COVID deaths and poverty. So this remained unseen. And so one of the things we looked at, and I'll share my screen to show you, because we were able to look at this across counties, across all the counties in the country, we were able to see what was happening we were able to identify the poorest counties and the counties that had the highest death rates. So this is where you can find the report. It's on our website. If you go to Learn, the Learn menu at the top, Poor People's Pandemic Report, it'll pop up. And if you scroll down a little bit, you can kind of read the analysis and the story map it's called. It goes through the whole thing. And if you scroll down a little bit further, it takes you to this interactive county level map. And if you click on that, you can actually see all of these counties. So you could put in, and I'll go through this in a minute, you could put in your state. So we could put in Alabama, and then you can select your county. So I'll get to that in a second, but I want to just talk for a minute about what you see here, these 300 counties with the high poverty and high death rates. Now, it's probably no surprise to you all living in Alabama that more than half of these high poverty, high death rate counties are in states that didn't expand Medicaid, right? So more than half of them are in those states. 17 of them are in Alabama. So 17 of the counties in Alabama made this, 300 counties with high poverty and high death. And so one of them is Lowndes County. So I just wanted to share a little bit about what we saw with Lowndes County. So again, if you go over here, go to Alabama, it highlights Alabama down here, and I can go to my county and look up Lowndes County, Alabama. Sometimes it takes a minute to load because there's a lot of information. So it kind of highlights Lowndes County. There we have it. And I can click on that, and then a bunch of information will come up. Again, it may just take a second. So once the information that comes up about Lowndes County, where are we? Is it going to come up? Well, anyhow, okay, here we go. Oh, now it's zooming. Anyway, so what we see about Lowndes County when the information does pop up, oh, there we have it. There we go. Again, it just takes a minute. Here we go. So Lowndes County had a death rate of 709 out of 100,000 people. This is a higher death rate than what was in the Bronx. It was a higher death rate than in other kind of epicenters of the pandemic. But what we also see in Lowndes County is that more than half the people in the county are living are poor, as we define it, living under twice the poverty line. We double the poverty line because it's so meager. It's such a low estimate of what poverty should be. So we doubled it to see who fell, either below that line or right above it. And more than half of Lowndes County lives within that threshold. Almost more than 70%, almost 3 out of every 4 people living in Lowndes County is rent burdened or paying more than 30% of their income on rent. This is one of the highest police violence rates that I've seen when I've done these county snapshots. And you could see the racial demographics. It's about 74% Black or African-American and about a quarter white. Now, Lowndes County has a lot of things in common with these other 300 counties that had high poverty and high death rates, and the fact that it's a rural county. In fact, rural counties have been a little bit ignored or unseen in the pandemic because their deaths a lot of times they don't have over 100 deaths because they're smaller. And so if you have fewer than 100 deaths, you're not going to get this kind of breakdown from the CDC. And I think we all know that. So some of these counties, the top county we saw here, Ellis, Virginia, also a rural county, has twice the death rate of the Bronx. We've never heard about Ellis, Virginia, right? So we needed something that would put Lowndes County next to, and I did some digging around to kind of look at some of the other counties in Alabama that had some of the highest poverty and death rates. Another county was Hale County. So I looked up Hale County. And so you can kind of see the same information. You can kind of go back and forth. So here's Hale County. And if we click on Hale County, we get our information that'll pop up. And this tells us again, it says less than 100 deaths, right? So we're not going to have heard much about the CDC. The death rate, again, very high, 662 per 100,000 people. Again, more than, about half the county is poor. Almost 10%, one out of every 10 person is uninsured. A lot of people are paying too much in rent. And this is less Black, more white, but again, within that set of counties that has very high poverty and very high COVID-19 deaths. And then the last one I wanted to share with you was Walker County, which from what I understand of Alabama, so we're kind of covering different parts of the state. That was my timer. So I think I'm close to my time. But, Walker County, which I think is right next door to Birmingham, not too far from Birmingham. What we see in Walker County, like on that, is, again, very high death rate. The income's a little bit higher, but not by any means wealthy. 11% of the county is uninsured, and this is a predominantly white county. And so we need something, right? Like, we're still digging into this data. And on the one hand, it confirms what we already know, that while COVID didn't discriminate, our society did, that these poorest counties had some of the highest death rates in the country. And in fact, some of the highest death rate counties have a poverty rate of 45% or higher. And so these things go hand in hand. And once we see the true extent of it and its consequences, meaning all of this death and devastation, it's on us to make things different. This doesn't need to be and will never be the end of the story. It's on us to summon the political will that will, that looks at Lowndes County and Walker County and Hale County, all the other counties in Alabama together. And so, to make sure that everyone has health care who doesn't have it yet, that everyone has affordable housing who doesn't have it yet, that everyone has clean water and voting rights, to make sure that this is the basis that we build from. And so I hope that, what I've learned by developing this resource and working on it and using it, is that we are able to see these connections across communities that may not appear to have much in common otherwise. But if we can establish a basis that we can come together, whether it's healthcare, housing, ending poverty, right? These are very strong bases to build from towards June 18th and also beyond. So I'll stop there. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but we could also move on with the rest of the agenda for the evening.
Shelley, that was so good. Folks, you'll notice that I dropped into the chat a link to the report. when Shelley went over the counties in Alabama, I felt my heart breaking. And I hope that you'll be able to have time to dig through this report at some point. I don't see any questions in the chat for Shelley. We're a small enough group that if somebody has a question for Shelley before she has to leave, you could take yourself off mute and ask that question. Okay, so thank you, Shelley, so much for coming. Y'all, this was a great honor and pleasure for us that she could come, but she also has to leave us to go to another meeting. So thank you very much.
Thank
and
you so
now
much.
Thanks, Shelley. And now I'll turn it over to the chairs. Reverend Foster, do you want to start?
I'll start, and I really appreciate her sharing that data. Those of us who are active and a part of the leadership team, the coordinating committee, and the tri-chairs of the Alabama Poor People's Campaign know that one of our supporters and testifiers, and who was really active in sharing her story, Pam Rush from Lowndes County, passed of COVID in early 2020, before the vaccine was even developed. And that was a big blow to us. If you've ever seen any of the Poor People's Campaign videos, she is sharing her story to Congress. She was really, really active with the Poor People's Campaign. She has suffered in Lowndes County with ecological devastation, with open sewer in her yard because of lack of clean water and lack of sewers, proper sewer system. And so it was a big blow to us to lose her in, I think it was May of 2020. So those, and then when she highlighted Walker County, the Episcopal Church has a camp in Walker County, Camp McDowell. Some of you may have been up there. So those two counties really broke my heart to see that data, because those are two counties that are close to my heart. So I really appreciate this. She lifted that up. I am, as Dana introduced me, Carolyn Foster, one of the tri-chairs of the Alabama Poor People's Campaign. There are three of us who chair a coordinating committee of about 14 or 15 other leaders around the state that coordinate our efforts, coordinate our advocacy work, and what we do to keep the Poor People's Campaign moving forward here in this state. I got involved with the Poor People's Campaign as in early, well, we formed as a coordinating committee in 2017, but 2 years before that, I had the opportunity to meet Reverend Barber when he came to Birmingham with the Moral Revival tour with Reverend Dr. Leah Steele Harris. And Greater Birmingham Ministries was instrumental in organizing his visits when he was here, a mass meeting. And then what the Moral Revival tour developed into a base for the Poor People's Campaign. And Alabama, as Shelley said, is one of the leaders among the now 45 states that have formed the Poor People's Campaign. I'll turn it now to Connie so he can introduce himself and tell a little bit about how you got started with the Poor People's Campaign.
I believe it was in 2015 when they had the 50th anniversary of the Edmund Pettus Bridge crossing, the Jubilee in Selma. I was there, and some other friends came down with Dr. Leah Steele Harris, who we'd known for years. And we talked about the need for another Poor People's Campaign. So that was initially. And then in 17, when they had the meeting in Birmingham, we went there, and it's really grown from there. It really is a movement. It's not an organization, but it's a movement whose time has come again. And I am so blessed to be a part of it. And I really would encourage everybody on this Zoom call to go in and join the Poor People's Campaign, because then you get access to all the emails, all the reports, like the one that Shelley just gave. We'd love to have you. Strengthen numbers. I'll pass it to Wanda.
We can't hear you, Wanda. Are you speaking?
Can you hear me?
Now we can. Go ahead.
Hear me?
Go ahead, Wanda.
Oh, okay. I was called to join the campaign, I think back in 2019. Carolyn, I knew Carolyn, and I went to see Dr. Barbara speak at Tabernacle Baptist Church. Like I said, I think it was 2019. And then it was so powerful. And
I'll listen for it now.
Okay. And I was called to be a testifier. Then I was called to join as one of the tri-chairs. And the issues that we fight for they so necessary. It's like something that I was called to do. You know, the poverty, the health care, the prison reform, all of that. And, you know, somebody's got to do it. And I just love to encourage people to come and join us, because, you know, it's a fight that we all have to fight. And I'm part of some of these things that we're fighting for. So, you know, that's just something that that everybody is part of. We got a song that we sing, everybody has a right to live. And that's definitely a true song. So those are some of the issues that I feel strong about fighting for.
The Poor People's Campaign was a vision of Dr. King's in 2006. No, I'm sorry, in 1967. He started gathering together people who were directly impacted by injustices such as poverty and lack of voting rights and workers' rights and living wages, you name it. And he was traveling the country, really gathering folks together to form what he called at that time, of course, a Poor People's Campaign. And you may remember that it was to launch in 1968. And he was on his way to Washington, D.C. when he stopped in Memphis to work with sanitation workers who were on strike, to support them and to gather them and to support their work. And he was assassinated there. The campaign did go, I mean, their march to Washington did happen, but it was not as impactful as it is hoped, because people were still grieving. It was like 1 month, I think, after his assassination. Reverend Dr. William Barber and Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris, 50 years later, saw that we as a country were still struggling with those same issues around poverty, around racism, around the war economy. What we have added to this new launch is, of course, ecological devastation, because that was not so much an issue then. And then what we are also facing now is a distorted moral narrative that we are working really hard to dismantle and to change the narrative. So those are the 5 pillars of this new iteration of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And as Reverend Barber and Reverend Liz traveled the country and started gaining support, we launched this campaign in 2018. At that time, we had 30 states that had come on board and formed this movement. I'm really glad that Connie pointed out that it is a movement and not an organization. You may remember that Dr. King had supporters who were Black, who were white, who were poor, who had means, who were all religions, who were abled and disabled. And that is exactly the same concept that we follow today. Everybody is welcome. Everybody's welcome to join this movement. And we are working on tough issues that has taken, going back to Dr. King, over 50 years, and we're still struggling with some of them. We've had some successes, and we have had to keep pushing on a lot of them. And I know the League of Women Voters know how much of a fight it has been around voting and all of the step back that this country has now taken to continue to suppress the vote. And that's a part of our issues too. So what we have found is that ally groups, partner groups like the League of Women Voters, environmental groups, the disability groups have all come together in what Reverend Barber likes to call a fusion movement. Because when you fuse things together, it is stronger. So we're not, when we say we'd like for you to join the Poor People's Campaign, we're not talking about joining an organization, but a movement. And we, right now in Alabama, have about 4,000 people that have signed on to be a part of the movement. And we would need to grow so much more so that we can really make a statement with not only our voices, but with our bodies. When we show up in Montgomery for a rally, or in our legislator's office, or when we show up at our city halls, we can show up in numbers and really speak our piece about these issues are important to all of us. That's what the Poor People's Campaign is all about. Tanya, you want to talk a little bit about the issues that the Montgomery area Poor People's Campaign have been struggling with around this homeless issue, as an example?
Yes, I would here in Mobile, but if I may, I'd like to say a little bit more about the history of the Poor People's Campaign.
Oh, certainly.
Dr. King, as many of y'all well know, have been involved in the civil rights movement, the voting rights movement, since the early 50s, and then the Montgomery bus boycott. But then in '67, he said, it's not enough to have, he says, we got to move from voting rights and civil rights to human rights. It's not enough to be able to go in any restaurant you want now if you can't afford the meal. And so that's when he set about organizing the poor whites, Blacks, and Latinos. He also said that this country, in giving voting rights and civil rights, it didn't cost this country a penny to do that. As a matter of fact, it really helped them because industries were moving to the South from the North, and they couldn't really operate their industries under the segregation laws that existed down here then. So in a sense, they were able to take advantage of the cheap labor that was being tractored off the land in agriculture and then move them into labor, because they were here again moving to the South for the cheap labor. And he said, now, it didn't cost them a penny, but what we're talking about is going to cost them millions and billions of dollars to lift the load of poverty. He said, we have the ability to do that. We spend, it was something like $353,000 on every Viet Cong that was killed in Vietnam, and only about $53 on the war per person on the war on poverty here in this country. That is why that they had him assassinated. And it wasn't James Earl Ray that assassinated Dr. King. His family took them to court in Memphis in 1996. They took the city of Memphis, the police, the highway patrol, the FBI to court, and they proved in court that it was a collusion on the part of those that ran the government or controlled the government that had him assassinated. And that's why the movement today, when it's been revived at a time that it's most needed, is so important and so crucial. We can't keep operating in silos, separated from each other, and expect to be able to win justice and win our rights. That's why we have organizations like the National Union for the Homeless that's involved in it. We have unions that are partners. We have churches that are partners in the Poor People's Campaign. And that's why we're talking about movement. We can't continue to operate in our own little silos and just on this one thing without seeing the interconnectedness of all our struggles. The environmental devastation that goes on, that affects poor people more than it does anyone else. The issue of water, 60% of the waterways, the lakes, the rivers, and all in this country are not fit for human consumption or even animals. And these corporations have operated with impunity. We know they don't care about us. They don't care whether our children get educated or not, yet they'll spend 53 cents of every taxpayer dollar that we pay in for the military budget. This country cannot operate without creating poverty. And thus we see the rise from the 140 million people that are living in poverty and low wealth today compared to the 50 million when Dr. King was alive. And more people being thrown into homelessness. Here in Mobile, we took up the fight against an ordinance that was introduced by 2 of our city council members that would make it illegal for homeless people to sleep anywhere within the city limits of Mobile, to have a sleeping bag. They couldn't sleep under bridges, on railroad right-of-way, public property, anywhere. They would be subject to a $500 fine and up to 6 months in jail. So what they're doing, they're criminalizing poverty. Fortunately, we were able to get other groups, in addition to the Poor People's Campaign, come in, put so much pressure on the city council that they ended up having to table the motion because they knew it would not pass. Here again, this is a fusion movement. One other thing, just lastly, is that if you go back and look at the maps from 1864, during that period, the Black Belt area, the rich soil that runs across Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, even down touches into Louisiana, that was a concentration of the plantations. And after Reconstruction, a lot of the people that had been former slaves stayed behind, stayed in that area. It was also some of the places that had the most activity during the Civil Rights Movement. After the Civil Rights Movement, and here again, companies, look at all the auto companies that have moved down here for the cheap labor and all the incentives, tax incentives that go to the companies while we suffer and can't even, won't even expand Medicaid, but we spend billions of dollars to build two new prisons. And here again, they're anticipating ways to criminalize homelessness. But if you take those maps and then you look at the poverty, it runs along that same Black Belt line. Companies after the Civil Rights Movement would not locate in the Black Belt areas deliberately, the auto plants or whatever, because they were afraid that the people would be more likely to unionize since they had organized during the Civil Rights Movement, and thus just continue to create poverty in those areas. I'll pass it to Wanda.
Can you hear us?
Wanda, you're on mute. If you could unmute, please. Let me see if I can do that for you.
I think she's unmuted now.
Yeah, there we go.
You know, Tony was talking about the homelessness. We got so much homelessness here in Birmingham also. You know, a year ago, it's a lady that froze to death in Lynn Park, and nothing was really done about it. That's part of the homelessness. And right now I'm reading where they bring because of the games that come in here, they making tents, temporary like little tents for the homelessness, for just because the games coming to Birmingham. And all that's not fair. My thing is, I've asked the question, why they gotta be temporary? You know, it's just not right, because this country is too rich for everybody to be living, you know, like this. I'm not far away myself from possibly homeless, um, living from payday to payday. And like I said, that's one of the reasons I fight so much, because not only am I fighting for somebody else, I'm fighting for here, for me and my family also. So that's where we need to do it in union. You know, everybody need to engage, because, you know, it could hit home anytime. You just don't never know. You know what I'm saying?
Wanda and I just recently had dinner with, in the Birmingham area, Poor People's Campaign. We have been working really hard in supporting for workers' rights around the Amazon workers who are wanting to form a union. And just recently, we got involved with supporting the miners, the United Mine Workers, who have been on strike for over a year and have come to no conclusion. And Tani is right in that, you know, Alabama is a right to work state, as they call it, meaning that they really fight hard to keep unions out. But unions were big in the 60s and 70s. And now I see this resurgence of people, workers who are demanding, coming together and demanding their rights. But the rally that we went to around to support the mine workers a couple of weeks ago, last week or a couple of weeks ago, we were able to also have dinner with 3 of their union leaders. And you want to share some of the stories that we heard, Wanda, at dinner, what they have been struggling with for the past year? Do you recall?
Go ahead.
Okay. One of the things that they have been struggling with is that they've had, I mean, and first off, if I say this, I know you'll get it. They are striking in Brookside. And you all know Brookside has been in the newspaper for the past several months around all of the corruption that has been going on in Brookside. Because their fight has gone on so long, now they are having sort of the community turn against them in terms of, why are you still having a strike? You know, why are you still on this street striking? And the mayor has turned against them and not giving them any support. And they had an injunction, a judge in Brookside that passed an injunction where they now can no longer strike in front of the entrance of the mine. They have to be across the street, which doesn't seem legal to me. And they can only have, the injunction said, they can only have 10 people walking the picket line. That doesn't seem right to me. But this is Brookside. And what's happening is people who are breaking the picket line, they call them scabs, are meeting up somewhere in Brookside, getting on a yellow school bus and being driven into the mine, escorted by Alabama state troopers. That tells you, which was signed off by Governor Ivey. So that tells you that the governor is in on it, that the city of Brookside is in on it, that the public school system has given them permission to use the school bus. And that's what they have been fighting for a whole year. And so we talk about these systems that are in place to keep people from their rights, workers' rights, living wage rights, poverty. It all is a system that we, as the Poor People's Campaign, work really hard to dismantle. And that's one of the reasons why I stay in the fight, because I grew up here in Birmingham during segregation, actually. And in a community that was bombed by the Ku Klux Klan quite often, Smithfield, that neighborhood that surrounds Legion Field, if you're familiar with that, when it was the football capital of the South. And I had friends who were part of the Children's March when they got water hosed by Bull Connor. And all of that is still very much a part of my memory in growing up. So when this new Poor People's Campaign, or this new relaunch of the Poor People's Campaign was forming, I quickly became involved because I knew the struggle was still there. And it has just magnified in a lot of ways. And so it's important for us to come together, as Connie has said, so that we can all fight together, speak up together, rally together, go to DC together in order to make these changes that affect all of our neighbors here in Alabama and this country. 140 million people in a country as rich as America is really shameful. And so the resources are there. It's just the political will is not there. And I really support the work of the League of Women Voters in getting folks registered, we have been working to get people educated around how to vote, and not because of who's popular, but look at your issues and make sure that you are being represented. So we work at it from that end. We also, do voter registration and that kind of, and restoration and those kind of things. But we know that we have got to do a lot of voter education, and particularly targeting these counties, like Shelley pointed out, that are completely ignored, where people are invisible because no one goes and talks to them and tries to educate them and tries to let them know that they are valued. And that is what we, as the Poor People's Campaign, is all about.
One thing too, before the COVID pandemic, there was already a pandemic of poverty in this country. 750,000 people died each year from poverty-related causes. It could be homelessness. It could be not being able to afford medical care. One of our strong members on our coordinating committee, Callie Greer, had her daughter, Venus, die from breast cancer because she couldn't afford to get it treated. Folks, we're talking about life and death issues here. And we know that as far as the corporations go, our lives don't mean diddly squat to them. They've shown that throughout history. In Alabama, there are 2.1 million people that are living in poverty or low income. 2.1 million. That's 42% of the entire population. And 764,000 of those are people of color. 1.1 million are white. But one of the things that they do, and it happens every election, they try to play the poor whites off against the blacks to keep us divided. And that's why we've got to come together in this fusion movement, because that's the only way. I'm convinced that's the only way we're going to really really change things in this country. And so that our children and our grandchildren aren't going to be having to fight the same battles. And at least we'll leave a world that's safe to live in.
And the reason why we are going to DC on June 18th, all 45 states are mobilizing, just like we're doing here in Alabama, is because Congress will still be in session. June 18th is the summer solstice, when the sun is at its brightest and in its longest. So there's a spiritual component symbolic of that. And it's the day before Juneteenth. So that date was picked symbolically. And we plan to mobilize here in Alabama so that Alabama has a very big and strong delegation to say, we are here and we will not be silent about these issues anymore. That is actually one of the songs as Wanda talked about that we also sing, because movement, art, songs are all a part of any movement. If you've seen any of the video from the civil rights movement. And one of the songs we say is somebody's hurting our people and it's gone on far too long and we won't be silent anymore. And so we're asking everyone to let's get off the sideline and let's get in the game and let's go and fight and let's go and speak out and let's go and let our elected officials know that we aren't going anywhere. And we want our issues. We demand that these issues be addressed because it can be. They're political. They don't have the political will. But one of the quotes that I like to share by Jim Wallace is that politicians move the way the wind blows, and it is up to us to shift the wind. And so when we show up in Washington, D.C., we're going to be shifting the wind. And that's why June 18th is so important. So I want to thank the League of Women Voters for being a mobilizing partner in getting folks to D.C. on June 18th. Wanda, anything you want to say?
I've had some technical difficulties, so my audio is on my phone. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. So I've dropped several links in. The last one that I dropped was how to RSVP for the March on Washington. It's going to be critical, as Reverend Foster said, to have a huge amount of people turn up. And Darlene Freeman is the person from the League who will be organizing the League's mobilization effort. There have been a couple of questions that have been posted. Now, there was one earlier from Catherine Davies that I can't see any longer because I had to sign out and sign back in. So Catherine, if you want to come off mute and ask your question, and then I'll ask the others in the chat.
Yes, I really like the set of priorities, the 14 policy priorities that you have. And I'm wondering about whether you have you got them in an order that you're addressing them, or are they all equally important?
Tanya, you want to answer that?
We aren't going down the list and checking them off. All of these are important. All of them are fused together, interconnected. Some groups may be working on, voter registration and voter suppression, and other groups may be working on environmental issues. Others may be working on the labor movement. So that's why we call it really a fusion movement. You can't eliminate environmental degradation unless you deal with the military budget. The military is the largest polluter, not only in this country, but worldwide. and they just got $833 million annual increase in their budget. We talk about mass incarceration, criminalizing poverty, and the need to expand, medical care. At the same time, they take $400 million of American relief funds, and they here in Alabama, and use it toward the 2 new prisons, rather than give health care coverage to everybody. So that's my answer on it. They're all so important, and we say we got to do more. We've got to mobilize, we've got to organize, we've got to register, and then also we've got to educate people about these issues. The average citizen out here doesn't know that there are 2.1 million people in Alabama living in poverty, and it's also what figures we had. It was #1 industrial state in the nation now, but it's about within the top 3 when it comes to poverty. Something's wrong with that picture. Something's wrong with it.
Kathy, you had posted a couple of questions as well. Would you like to ask those?
Sure. I had tried to think of some questions that might help us get us all aligned so we can figure out where to target. And one of them was the pandemic report. To me, seems like such valuable information for a lot of things, but I'm wondering, especially the Cover Alabama Coalition, how are you planning to fold that together so maybe we can start trying to help people understand better? I mean, they should already know, but why we need to expand Medicaid.
Yeah, the Poor People's Campaign, Alabama Poor People's Campaign is a part of that coalition, as well as Greater Birmingham Ministries, where I work. And so I haven't yet shared the link or the report with them. They had a meeting the other day, coalition meeting the other day, and I wasn't able to make it. But I will share it with Jane Adams, who is the executive director. She has spoken on some of our statewide coalition meetings, which, by the way, we're having a statewide assembly call on Sunday for our partners to talk about June 18th. So Dana will get you a link to that if you wanted to join that, so you can see who the other partners who are working to mobilize as well. So I will get that information to Jane Adams to share with the coalition. There's about 100, I think, groups that are part of the Cover Alabama Coalition. And this report definitely is so important to all of our work. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention to folks on the line that the League of Women Voters is also a member of Cover Alabama. Yeah. We're a member of the Alabama Rise Network, but we're also a partner with Cover Alabama. So it's definitely something that we're supported. Mm-hmm. I had a question that, is not an easy, I don't think you're going to have, the answer, but it's a challenge. When I've tried to register voters who are homeless, or citizens who are homeless, you have to draw a picture on the voter registration form of where they are living. Mm-hmm. There's a little block, and I know that they assign the voting district based on where they're living, and then they require a mailing address so that the voters can get their voter ID card, so they'll know. Not their ID card, but their voter card, so they'll know where to go vote. And it seems that that's really a problem, because a lot of times when you're homeless, you're also not going to be in the same place from week to week, So I'm just wondering, one of the things that I've wondered is there seems to be a lot of homeless here, and I live in Huntsville, but that don't necessarily have a place to get their mail. And then how do you make voting more accessible for the homeless?
I know in Birmingham, I worked with the homeless shelter for 7 years, the firehouse shelter. And we allowed, the homeless people to use the firehouse shelter's address as their own. And Church of the Reconciler is another church in downtown Birmingham that have a lot of homeless services. And so I don't know about Huntsville. I do remember I had a friend who was really active with an organization called One Stop.
They have mailboxes. They do have
Okay.
mailboxes. I think
That's
they have some restrictions, but yeah.
But that's another system again that hinders and blocks people that we really do need to work on to make better. Because there are all kinds of obstacles. We live in a country where if you are a citizen, you should be able to vote. But yet there are all kinds of systems in place to keep people, to obstruct voting.
Yeah.
And it's just shameful, really.
I could see where automatic voter registration would really help for the homeless, because then they could have their address updated as wherever they go.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
It's another form of voter suppression.
It is.
Yeah.
Really what it is.
Yeah.
Directed toward the poor.
Exactly.
Dana, I have one more question. Can I ask it, or you got another one?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. So I was just curious. There were 7 counties that the H-194, where they were calling out the counties that received grants during the pandemic to buy PPE. And I was just thinking, I'll bet you that they're on that list, the pandemic report, because the reason they got that money was to help to purchase equipment or supplies that they needed to provide for safe voting. But the list was Bullock, Dallas, Hale, Jefferson County, Macon County, and Montgomery County. I was just thinking that to me, it just looks like when you start what you were talking about, all the interconnection between these issues, it's like those are, I don't think they would have asked for the money if they had gotten adequate funding to provide voting services to their citizens.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
But that was a powerful report. I think it's going to provide a lot of important data.
Yeah, absolutely.
Robin has a comment in chat. Robin, would you like to come off mute?
Well, I didn't want to interrupt the conversation, but I was just making an observation that all of this suppression and lack of benefits to people living in poverty is self-defeating, because these people are exactly the people that we need to become more prosperous members of society so that everybody could benefit. So it's in the chat, we need a bigger workforce in Alabama, and they're right there under our noses. And what do? We suppress their vote. We don't let them form unions. We don't educate them. And then what happens? We don't have a workforce.
Yeah. I sort of think that they know in the back, and not necessarily in the back of their minds, but they know that there are more of us than of them. And so they keep the elite at the top, which is a small number of folk, and then they suppress the 140 million at the bottom. Because
it's so stupid. I mean, they're not going to lose their place. They're just going to have a better workforce. So maybe they don't make 20%. Maybe they get cut down to 15%. They still can go buy their yachts and whatever they want, but everybody else would be able to go to school, live in a decent house. Henry Ford did this 100 years ago. He said, I'm going to give my workforce a decent wage because otherwise they can't afford to buy my cars.
Right.
And that is fast happening today. You look at the auto plants that moved down here with the robotics and replacing workers. Ford Rouge plant had 50,000 workers under one roof in 74. And today that same plant has 15,000 workers and producing more cars. Robot can't walk in the showroom, put the money down and drive the car out. It's exactly what you're saying.
Well, it's beyond that though, because somebody's got to program the robots. There should be better jobs for everybody. And I think assembly line jobs are going to go away, but we're doing it all the wrong way. What we need to do is give everybody the education that they would like to have and let them decide what kind of productive members of society they want to be, not just assign them to some repetitive job that they may or may not want.
But if you educate the people, some folks will lose their power, and it's always about power.
That's the problem. It's not really about money. It's about power.
Power, exactly. It's about power.
Well, it is about the power, but it's about the power to control the money, to make the money.
But they're always going to be able to make money. They just don't have to make it in an unethical way.
They haven't done
Carolyn,
it.
we use a lot of songs in the campaign, and one of our songs is "When you lift from the bottom, everybody rises."
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Well,
Yes.
Y'all, this has been a fascinating discussion. It's 7:05, and I want to be respectful of people's time. I've dropped several links in the chat. I hope that we can get so many League of Women Voters members in DC on June 18th that will just blow it away, as well as many other people from the state as well. Are there any other questions that anybody wants to ask before we close down, or comments?
So I was going to mention, I did want to mention that we're going to send out a letter to all participants with what Dana's been sharing. She's going to craft a letter it's going to follow up. So just to answer the question.
Yeah. So you can either save your chat with all the links, or as Kathy said, we will follow up. The links I've shared tonight are to the pandemic report, to the 2020 fact sheet for Alabama, to how to RSVP to the march, and how to join the Poor People's Campaign. I also one of the last ones, we're having a statewide meeting on Sunday, and please copy that link down tonight in case we don't get the email out on time. To register for that meeting, I've put that link in the chat as well, because we would love to see all of you on Sunday night as we talk about mobilizing. So please, if you can see that, just in case we don't get the email out in time for y'all to register for Sunday.
Dana?
Yes.
Dana, I just
Yes.
posted all of these links to the League of Women Voters Greater Tuscaloosa Facebook page, so that the descriptions may be copied and shared to your own social media pages very easily, or just shared directly from the League of Women Voters Greater Tuscaloosa page.
Thank you, Darlene. That's great.
I just want to say thank y'all so much for having us. It's really been a pleasure, and we so look forward to working with y'all, partnering with you.
We're excited to be able to work with you and find ways to collaborate on especially trying to get people to get out to the polls and address some of the problems that you're talking about, because they are all connected. Everything we're talking about, from environmental justice to poverty to everything that homelessness, is all connected if we can just get people to see it.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Dana. Thank you for moderating, and I appreciate your bringing this opportunity to us. And so I'm going to